Welcome to the Pink Pineapple Podcast, where we peel back femtech and take a bite out of more than just the juicy bits.
I'm Claudia, and I'm Emma's partner in Pineapple for this adventure.
And I'm Emma. Together, we're exploring women's health across the full timeline, from first periods to menopause and everything in between.
Each week, we'll dive into the stories, science, and software shaping the future of women's health. From hormones to hardware, fertility to femtech founders.
Think of us as your slightly nosy best friends who just happen to be doctors with a healthy curiosity for innovation.
We'll be chatting to clinicians, creators, and changemakers. And yes, asking the questions you actually want answered.
So whether you're out for a walk, cooking dinner, or hiding from your to-do list, join us as we get curious, clinical, and occasionally controversial.
This is the Pink Pineapple Podcast,
where women's health meets what's next. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Pink Pineapple Podcast. And we are delighted today to have Ella Harris with us. She is the founder and CEO of UVISA. We are delighted to have her here. And Claudia, have you got another guest with you in your part of the virtual studio?
I'm proud of myself. Feel like I've outdone myself. What do you think?
Wow.
I was so excited to see what the pineapple was going to be.
She's surrounded in flashing lights. She is like a flashing glitter ball of lights today. I'm quite proud of this one.
Ingenious. Fantastic. You never disappoint with the pineapple. Never.
Except for when it was a beetroot or a squash.
Even when it was a root vegetable, you still came through. I'm so proud of you. So down to business. Ella, for listeners who haven't come across UVISA, can you explain what problem is it that you're trying to solve and why does it matter so much?
Yeah, absolutely. So as women, we are all women here. As women, we know that our vaginas are quite sensitive, actually. And most of us at some point or another will experience the symptoms related to what's called vaginal dysbiosis, or an imbalanced vaginal microbiome. And this can present in different ways, but the common symptoms that we'll experience are itching or discomfort or pain, burning sensation, or abnormal discharge. And so most of us can relate to this problem, right? What is not known is how widespread this is and what impact this has on people's lives. So 80% of women will experience this once. 30% of women will live with this repeatedly throughout their lives. But what we found actually, it's 9 to 14% of women that live with highly recurrent symptomatic episodes. And when I say that, that's 3 or more episodes every year of these symptoms. Now, these are often leading to actual vaginal infections like yeast infections and bacterial vaginosis. And when they are not treated properly, particularly with the bacterial infections, they also impact your fertility and your pregnancy outcomes, and they can lead to things like pelvic inflammatory disease. So that's, in a nutshell, the problem we're addressing is the vaginal dysbiotic vaginal infections.
And you just mentioned about a couple of the common causes. So, for example, thrush or candidiasis and bacterial vaginosis. For women, those that experience those symptoms that you've mentioned, so the irritation, the discharge, etc., what does that typical pathway in diagnosis and treatment look like for them currently?
So the majority of women, when first experiencing these symptoms, regardless of geography as well, actually, will self-investigate and I'll try to self-diagnose first, right? Because this is embarrassing. There's still a lot of shame and taboo around it. So you don't want to go to somebody and say, hey, I've got a problem with my vagina. So you'll Google it, you'll look for something yourselves, and then you'll probably go to a pharmacy and try an over-the-counter remedy. You can pick up an antifungal without a prescription in the UK and in Denmark. In most countries, actually, I think you can pick up an antifungal without a prescription. So most women will try that first. Obviously, for those highly recurrent or chronic infections where that doesn't work or the problem comes back, what they will eventually do is end up in their doctor's surgery. Now, again, in the UK, that would be your GP as a starting point. In other countries, that might be actually a specialist gynecologist, depending on your healthcare system. But you'll end up in a doctor's surgery. In the UK and in Denmark, which is where we've done most of our market research, most GPs will send you away. If it's the first time they're seeing you, they will send you away to try an over-the-counter remedy first. Then they may do a physical exam. And the last resort would be an actual swab and microscopy analysis. And actually, the microscopy analysis is the only way to correctly diagnose these conditions. We're very fortunate that our GPs are very very well versed in this problem, though. So they usually don't need the microscopy to diagnose because a visual exam is usually sufficient for them with their experience. But they end up in this cycle, right, where they're going back to the doctors, back to the pharmacy, back to the doctors, back to the pharmacy. And when it gets really severe, they end up in the secondary healthcare system at a specialist gynecologist. And there are many women now who are becoming resistant to the medications. And so they end up at the specialist, and the specialist still is struggling to treat those conditions because the antimicrobial medications aren't working. So then we end up with things like boric acid washes for our vagina, which I've heard is actually not unpleasant, but it doesn't sound nice, does it? Like wash your vagina out with acid and that'll help it.
Yeah, I mean, I think Claudia and I can definitely relate to this group of women. And I think that it's something that if you work in general practice, you will see these women frequently. They are the kind of prescription requests that you get as well a lot of the time with women who are having these symptoms recurrently. Like, please, can I have another lot of antibiotics? Things haven't improved. And I would say as well that actually, for women that have got recurrent symptoms, I think that maybe as a group in primary care, I think we're maybe not sometimes managing the women as best as we could be. For example, I think that awareness around longer courses of antibiotics or referrals to secondary care, I don't know if you've got that data, Ella, but I would expect that maybe that's something where we're not maybe doing as good as we could at the moment. And I think women are kind of rebounding with just kind of short courses of antibiotics, which I can appreciate must be quite frustrating for them. So I wonder if there's a bit more of an awareness picture as well that we need to kind of do GP land really as well on these problems.
Think it's not just GP land, it's also among women themselves, right? Because yes, there's the short courses of antibiotics that are prescribed, but often women will stop taking them once they start to feel better. So they're not actually fully killing an infection before they cut the medication. And that's probably because antibiotics also come with side effects. And so, there's a whole heap of problems around the problem.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
was just going to say, I've done accelerators previously where they were like, but Ella, you need to describe your problem quickly. But it's not a simple problem to describe. There's so much around it.
The antibiotics as well, often we prescribe metronidazole. It's not the nicest antibiotic to have. It doesn't taste very nice. You can't drink alcohol when you're having it. It's not the nicest antibiotic to have, particularly if you're having it very often. And, it comes with a multitude of other side effects. And as you say, resistance is another key thing when it comes to antibiotics as well. Are there any other kind of frustrations or limitations that you've come across when you've done your research that patients describe?
The big ones are the actual correct diagnosis, right? Because to get the right medication at the minute, you do need to know whether it's a fungal infection or a bacterial infection because the medications are targeted at either or condition. So, yeah, getting the actual correct diagnosis is really challenging. I mean, in the UK, we all know waiting times for seeing doctors and specialists is huge. So if you're considered non-urgent referral to a gynecologist, you're going to be waiting, 2 years to see somebody? So it's access. Yeah, access and correct diagnosis. They don't like the medications. Like you say, they don't taste nice. They're also unpleasant to use. Even the vaginal pessaries, you put a pill inside you and then for the next 24 hours, you're leaking this like chalky, nasty, thick discharge. It's gross, like, to be honest. And so women really dislike the current standard of care for lots of reasons, but it is cheap. And so the barrier that we face is, well, why would somebody pay more for a device than for medications which are cheap?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great segue into the device. It would be lovely to hear more about what is UVISA, where does it fit into this pathway, and what is the device itself?
Yeah, so we've developed a physical device. It's a bit of an L shape. You can find it on our website, so you'll be able to see it there. It's like an L shape. So it has an insertable part that goes inside your vagina and a bit then that sits against your vulva. It contains very specific sources of light that target both bacteria and yeast. And so it's designed to reduce pathogenic microbes whilst basically preserving good microbes. So it rebalances the healthy balance of the vaginal microbiome.
And what do people think of it? Because obviously automatically you think, oh my gosh, it's something I've got to insert inside. So what kind of feedback have you had about the device?
I always am astounded whenever we go to an event or anything, we end up with a crowd of women around us. Just like, oh my God, when can I get this? Like, this is so much better than what there is currently. Because as women, we're not adverse to putting things inside us, right? We are very used to using tampons. We're very used to using sex toys. Obviously, getting a pap smear and having speculums. We're really used to this. And so our device has been ergonomically designed by a very skilled industrial designer to be comfortable for insertion. It's comfortable. The treatment itself is 30 minutes. So you insert this thing for 30 minutes and then you take it out and it's reusable. You wash it, you clean it, and then it's ready for the next time. And when we were doing our user testing, we 3D printed all these different shapes, sizes, angles of device. And we got women to insert them and leave them in for 30 minutes. And we thought that women would lie down and put this thing in and sit still and not move, for 30 minutes. And actually they didn't. They put it in, they put their clothes back on, and then they tootled around and folded up laundry and, did some work or whatever for 30 minutes. And then they were like, oh, it's done. Great. Perfect. So yeah, we carefully designed it so that it's really comfortable, that it's really easy to insert and take out. And generally, the feedback we've had is absolutely excellent. And we've just wrapped up our first clinical study where we've tested the actual active device in 38 patients, symptomatic patients. And their feedback is not only is it comfortable, but actually it feels quite nice because with the light sources, it heats up ever so slightly. And so it's quite comforting. It's like a hug from the inside.
I love that.
I suppose that helps maybe with some of the symptoms as well. If you're
Yeah.
feeling quite uncomfortable down below, I imagine that maybe that's kind of a bit of a relief as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So I was going to say this is for our t-shirt, Emma. You know how we keep printing t-shirts? A hug from the inside is one I never thought I would think about writing.
That's what's going to go on our t-shirts. You can't have it.
That's definitely needs to go on your pitch deck, Ella. I think that
Yeah.
needs to be, kind of your emotional hook slide on your pitch deck. I am super fascinated just about how light is able to treat infections. It just kind of blows my mind that is something that can happen. Is this a new technology? Is this something that you have been inspired by other areas of the industry? I'd love to know where this kind of idea came from, really.
Where did it come from? Yeah, so light actually, as an antimicrobial, has been known for centuries, actually. We were using light in the early 20th century to treat tuberculosis in patients. And in the Victorian era, they used to prescribe light. They used to say, go and get some sunlight, to tackle various skin issues or other, depression. We know that light has an impact on depression, but that's a different mechanism completely. As an antimicrobial, what light actually does is it stimulates these natural molecules in the bacteria or the yeast membranes called photosensitizers. So it stimulates these photosensitizing molecules and they release free oxygen. And so it causes oxidative stress in the membrane and it ruptures the membrane. So that kills the bacteria, which is really good because it's not damaging DNA. And so we have found that it doesn't damage our DNA and it doesn't really damage the membrane, the bacteria's DNA, but we don't need it to because it kills them in a different mechanism. So that's how it works scientifically. Where I got the idea from was that I was doing a master's degree in technology entrepreneurship 5 years ago, and I was doing this course where we were given a bit of research or a technology that had been developed in the university. I was at the Danish Technical University. We were asked to find a business case for it. And so 6 technologies were presented, but the one that I gravitated to, because I am a scientist by background, and I've always had this big sort of passion and interest in medical sciences and biological sciences, was this researcher that had been investigating whether you could assist antibiotics with UV light to reduce the number of antibiotics or the amount of antibiotics needed. And they'd found that light on its own was capable of destroying bacteria in a biofilm state. And so I instantly was like, oh my God, the potential that this has. And, this researcher stood up and said, this could be a great dental application. because we can bring the healing power of sunlight to parts of the body that don't see the sun. And as a woman with a vagina, obviously that on its own led me down that route. But also I just had a baby. And so I've been through a pregnancy and I got bad yeast infections during that pregnancy. And so it was fresh in my mind, this problem. So yeah, so light is not a new technology. We've known about it for a long time. Unfortunately, the pharmaceutical industry kind of squashed all of the research that was happening in that space when they developed antibiotics. And we all thought we had these wonder drugs, which have seen us well so far. But now we know that with AMR, there's a huge problem with that, and we're looking again to alternatives. And so we're seeing in the literature now as well more and more academic research being done into light. So we found papers where light's been used to treat COVID even.
I remember seeing
Yes.
that actually.
Super, super interesting. Like we've seen it in academia being used to treat Helicobacter infections in the stomach and in the vagina, using blue and UVA light in the vagina to treat these infections as well.
That's super interesting, and I love the story of how you got to working on it. What kind of UV light is it? Just out of
It's
interest.
UVA, so it's very, very close to visible spectrum, and that's really important because UV is obviously a spectrum, and the other end of that spectrum is very, very damaging. So UVC sterilizing stuff, don't ever put that near your body. It will probably give you cancer. The near visible stuff is much safer, and as long as it's controlled in dose, it's beneficial. It has the beneficial properties without being harmful.
How do you make sure then, when it comes to the microbiome, that it is only affecting the bacteria that's bad, as we say, and not the bacteria that's good?
That is a very good question. And it's what we spent the first 2 years investigating preclinically, like looking at the impact on all of the different microbes that we were going to find, or the most common microbes that we're going to find in that environment. And it's slightly different mechanisms of action in each species. And we found that yes, the light does still kill some of the good bacteria, but it doesn't kill it at the same rate that it kills the bad bacteria. And so our hypothesis going into the clinical trials was this is great because what we don't want a sterilizing effect. We don't want to wipe everything out, right? We need some of the good bacteria left. So our hypothesis was when you've got this imbalance, you've got the bad bacteria and the good bacteria. If it can go like this and like sort of level the playing field, then the good guys will come back up naturally because they are the dominant species. And so far, the data seems to be supporting that hypothesis. So we're very excited.
That's very cool. And are you comparing it to antibiotics? Because that's the other thing,
Not in
you know,
this.
what's the other option? And if the other option is antibiotics, and antibiotics kill even more, then already this is a better option than antibiotics, potentially.
Yeah, absolutely. No, in this study that we've just wrapped up, we haven't done that comparison. So we've just done our first in human. And the big question we needed to answer is, does this work in humans? Because translating preclinical research into clinical it's not often a direct translation. In our case, it does seem to have been. So that's incredible. But we needed, we're pioneering this as a treatment. So we're doing all of the research from the ground up. So first in human was just, does it work in humans? Are we seeing the right effect? The next study will be the comparison to antibiotics and antifungal.
And how have you found that process, Ella, arranging a clinical trial and recruiting for a clinical trial? How have you navigated that part of the journey?
That's a really good question, actually. And it isn't one that I've been asked a lot. So thank you for asking me that. I mean, I started UVISA without a clue how to run a medical device company, right? I've never done this before. So I've learned everything as I've gone. And I found that in the first couple of years, I was really leaning on advisors and guidance and external people to sort of tell me how to do it. And over the last few years, actually, I've learned more to trust my instincts and my gut and my own knowledge and expertise. And part of that process was through this arranging the clinical and the preclinical studies because we got a lot of external advice that said you need a contract research organization to run your study. You need a regulatory consultant to do all of your paperwork, all of your filing. You can't do it by yourself. And so we paid a fortune on regulatory consultants and external experts. And we just found it was going really slowly. They weren't really getting our problem. The study designs they were suggesting wasn't really answering the questions we needed answering. And so actually, we scrapped them and we did it ourselves. And so we found the research collaboration partners ourselves, wrote all of the documentation, the investigators brochure and the protocol. We wrote it in collaboration with the research partner that was going to be doing the study. So we've done it in Odense in Denmark at the university hospital there. We submitted to the ethics committee, which is the first step in getting the approval for a clinical trial. And actually, we had a sort of record speed approval for our study. And that shows the strength of A, our preclinical data, and B, our proposed clinical setup. So we got very, very few questions on that, and we got approval very, very quickly. So we found that doing it ourselves actually allowed us to move faster. Yeah.
So we'll be coming to you for help then with ours, Ella, okay?
Please do. Please do. If you need. I mean, I have to give a shout out to my co-founder, right? I'm not doing this by myself. And she is a PhD qualified medical scientist that has done clinical research in the past. So it isn't just me. I can't take all the credit, right? So big shout out to Sonal as well.
Yeah, well done to you both, because I think that it seems like a huge undertaking. Even when you've got those people that you mentioned, the CROs or regulatory consultants supporting you, it still seems like a very big undertaking. And I know you mentioned about kind of this comparator study that you're thinking of doing. Do you envisage that you'll be leading on that as well, kind of using the same setup that you've done successfully this first time round?
We are thinking about doing it that way. Yeah, I have to say. I mean, also a lot of this is driven by funding. And we were actually forced into a tight corner funding wise, because yes, we've raised funding, but we didn't have enough to pay for a CRO to just do the study for us. So a little bit was driven by what finances we had available. And we might be in a similar situation moving forward where it's a bit cheaper to do it yourselves.
Yeah, I think that's probably a nice way for us to start talking about funding and fundraising, actually. How have you found that journey? Because I know that you've fundraised before and that you're currently fundraising again now. What are your words of wisdom for the many people who will be listening to this and scratching their heads and kind of getting, massively overwhelmed with that ecosystem?
My first word of wisdom is throw away any entrepreneurship book that tells you that there's a set path or a set way to do it, because there isn't. Don't just listen to all the startup hype. You can read Sifted Daily and you can read all of the other newsletters and articles out there about how startups raise money. But if you are not, the next AI B2B buzz company, the reality is that you're going to struggle to fundraise. Yes, there are those success stories. Defense and AI right now are booming. And, you walk into an investor's office and show them a pitch deck and they'll probably chuck a couple of million at you. In women's health, that's not typically the journey we find ourselves on. So yeah, I would say my top tips are: don't chase VC money unless you really are on a quick IPO or a quick scaling journey, which when you're conducting research, you're probably not. Look at families, look at angels, high net worth individuals, get really creative with your grants as well, and look for soft funding. Don't lean only on grants though, because often they require co-financing, but always look at your runway as well and manage your cash flow. You have to manage your cash flow. You have to know exactly when you're running out of money. You have to know if you can squeeze it a little bit more, what you can cut. So cash flow is something that I look at almost on a daily basis.
And you just mentioned grants there as well, Ella, and about that there is this kind of thing where grants require matching sometimes
They
from
do.
external investment. Do you find that grants are really beneficial in gaining external investment? I know it's a bit of a strange question, but often if the feedback is that people need more traction, or there's this kind of assumption that somebody needs to be first, somebody needs to put money in the pot first.
Mhm.
And I suppose grants are one way of doing that. What I'm trying to say quite inarticulately is, do grants open doors? Are they a key that can open the door to other investment, in your opinion?
Yes, is the short answer. I think that it does show that, yeah, somebody's put money in the pot first, somebody's taken a chance on you to some extent. And, I have seen fundraising applications for investors where you have to have raised a certain amount in grants for them to even consider you. So yes, for sure. However, The amount of people that have said to me, oh, can't you just apply for some grants to keep you going? That's not how it works, right? Grants are not certain. They're highly competitive. They take a lot. The effort to write a grant application is enormous. Like I could have somebody working in my team full time on grants and probably we'd still only be successful in 20% of them, It's enormous. And then the way that the money is paid out varies grant by grant, but it is very rare that you get awarded the grant quickly and then a pot of money just lands in your account. Usually it's after the fact. So sometimes you have to work on a project for 6 months before you get any of the money. So it is not something that some companies do it and they do it really successfully. We haven't done that. And it's something when you're in a tight spot, it's not a quick fix.
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of people don't understand about grants is that a lot of it is claiming back money. So there needs to be some money in the pot, or there needs to be some kind of cash flow to get you through, and then you have to ultimately claim it back. And some of them have got
Exactly.
quite strict restrictions as well on what you can spend the money on, even to the point where it's which providers that it
Yeah.
is. For example, if it's a grant that's based in a particular country, it could be that you need to use for example, a UK based supplier, etc. So I think that they're not a kind of as clean cut as people think. I'd like to just go back and ask, kind of more, I suppose, around go to market. Where do you see the device being? Do you imagine this being on the shelf in a pharmacy? Do you imagine people buying this online, or is this something that you're hoping will be more of a B2B and that you'll be able to sell it to clinics to prescribe, etc.? What is your vision?
It would make my fundraising journey a lot easier if I was selling it to clinics and to businesses, believe me. But unfortunately not. So with this problem with women self-diagnosing, self-treating, and the first place they go to being pharmacies, we're going to have the biggest impact if we're on the shelf in a pharmacy or online where they can order it online. So our business model to start with is purely direct to consumer. We are going to do a big load of marketing and advertising ourselves to sell it directly, but also through pharmacies. We're really hoping to be on the shelves of Boots at some point in the next couple of years. And then once we have the data showing that it works and that it's better than the current standard of care, then we can look at going through healthcare systems to get it reimbursed and to get it prescribed and subsidized.
And with regards to next steps for UVISA, you've mentioned about the comparator trial. What else is kind of in the pipeline or in the works for you?
So we have an approach actually where we are planning to get our first regulatory approval. So for a medical device, for those that don't know, we follow something called the European Medical Device Regulation, or the MDR, and there are different classifications of devices in that. We are a class 2A device, which means that we cannot self-certify this as safe and effective. We have to get what's called a notified body to certify us before we can sell. So that's just a high-level overview there for anybody that might be listening that doesn't know this. So our first step is actually getting a first regulatory approval, or MDR CE mark, to be able to sell the device with the study we've done. And what that study data shows is that our device is effective at reducing your symptoms. So we will not be able to fully claim that we can treat it, but we will be able to address symptoms, which means we'll be able to start selling and marketing a device hopefully within the next 12 months, whilst we also do the next clinical study, which does the comparison to the standard of care, so that then after that study is wrapped up, then we can expand. It's called the claim set for the CE mark or the approval. We'll be able to expand our claim set later to treatment and actually say, yes, we claim treatment. So we have an approach where we're going for what we're calling a soft CE, soft claims first, to be able to start selling the product and getting it out there, and then later doing something else. So the big ones are regulatory approval and further research.
Excellent. Well, best of luck, because we'll definitely be watching. We'll be
Thank
following
you.
and we'll be interested to see what comes out of this. I think we always tend to ask founders that come and join us for some tips or some advice. You've already given some great advice, I think I would say, around the funding side. You talked about trials, now about medical device regulations. If there was something that you'd say was a mistake that you would love for others to avoid, is there something that you would advise?
Biggest mistake I made early on was incorporating as a company too soon. So I got awarded a grant when I literally was just me and one of my student pals with an idea. We applied for this grant funding, it was 75,000 Danish kroner, which is about £8,000, which to us, doing our master's degree, thinking this was a great idea, but not really having much meat on the bones, that was an amazing amount of money, right? We were like, 8,000, what can we spend that on? Like, we don't even need to spend that on anything, because we had no clue what we were doing. But a condition of getting that money was that we incorporated as a business. And so we did. And then we had to start doing all of the scientific research from the ground up. So I personally, if I had to do this again, I wouldn't do it that way. I would do the research through students, through master's and PhD projects. Then I would spin out and start the company after. So probably at this point now is when I should have started the company, once we had that first clinical data. But I didn't. But that's
You
one of
live,
my
you
things.
learn.
You live, you learn, but don't incorporate too soon, I would say. Don't, yeah. £8,000 is not a lot of money when you need to run a business. So yeah, that's my biggest lesson. I don't know if that would be helpful for other people, but certainly a mistake that I think I made.
I think that's a really good point, actually. And my other advice would be to anyone thinking of incorporating. I know we're getting quite specific for founders and business now, but really have a think about what you're gaining from incorporating straight away. And think about, for example, where are you planning on having your business? So there are, for example, now funders who will not, or they're trying to avoid funding businesses that are based in London. They're trying to fund businesses that are outside of London. You might find that a lot of registered addresses online are London based, but there are others that are, for example, I know I'm being very UK specific, but there are, places in Manchester or Birmingham or Leeds, etc.
Mhm.
The other thing is with grant funding, sometimes you have to have been incorporated for a specific period of time or less. So, for example, they might say that this is only open to businesses that have been incorporated for 12 months or less. So, you have to think about, what am I gaining from incorporating now? If it's just that actually I'm incorporated and realistically this is going to be a dormant company for 12 months, then in my opinion, don't bother. Like, wait until the time is right and then do it.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. This is stuff that, I mean, I was doing a master's in entrepreneurship, right? So I was essentially at startup school, and all of it was just start companies, launch startups. It's great. It's so cool. It's so easy, and to incorporate a company is easy. To open a company is easy. But then actually, what they don't tell you is you have a legal obligation and a financial obligation and an audit obligation, and that there is company structure and organizational structure is the cornerstone of your business. And so all those things you've just mentioned, Emma, about like, where are you actually operating? Who are you selling to? Where do you want to raise money as well? So we're a Danish company because I was in Denmark, even though I'm British, and we want to sell to the UK and we would like to raise money in the UK, but we can't really because angels will, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them will only invest in companies that have SEIS and EIS. So they're like tax schemes for investors. We're not eligible because we're not a UK company for those things. Actually, I think we are, but I think, yeah. Anyway, that's a bit of a longer story, but we're not those things yet. And there are certain VCs that only invest in UK-based companies. So I personally think as well, UVISA would have been a lot better off if we'd incorporated in the UK originally. But
That
I
is a
didn't
really
because I got
interesting
that
tip.
grant and I just went for it, right?
Yeah. It's a really good tip, isn't it? It's easy to get really overexcited, isn't it? Get really overexcited, register, get a pen and a mug with your brand on
Yeah.
it because it's really exciting.
You get caught up in the startup like circus, you know?
Yeah.
And I think now we're coming to a close, Ella. I'd be really interested. We've talked about your advice for founders. What's your advice for women if they've been stuck in this, self-treat cycle and they're getting super frustrated? What can they consider doing differently?
So now we have a lot of home-based testing options. So there are other companies offering vaginal microbiome testing and diagnostic tampons and things like that. So they can actually test themselves at home if they want to, if they don't want to go to a doctor. But I would really urge them to get a proper diagnosis, and actually push for the microscopic exam of a swab to tell them what is actually causing their problem, because then, only then will you get to the correct medication. And then if the medications aren't working, literally push to see if you can get tested for antimicrobial resistance, because then you get the answers that you need. It's not easy, but that's the best advice I can probably give.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And I think what I would second is, if you have tried something over the counter and it hasn't worked, please book in with your GP.
Yeah,
Please come in, because sometimes as well, there are other things potentially going on. If you come in, you can have an examination, you can have a full history taken. We can make sure that there's nothing else that could be causing problems as well. We've got access to the tests that you might need and other treatment options as well. So, yeah, take up that
exactly.
opportunity. That's what we're there for.
Exactly that. Very quickly, I'll just add to that. One very not known thing about yeast infections is they are very, very common in diabetic people. So, like you said, underlying conditions that are causing other things, why you might want to see your GP, that is one of them. So you might be diabetic and not know it.
100%. And also some of the new medications as well that we use to treat
Yeah.
diabetes make people pee out sugar, which does increase the amount of sugar that's in that area. Yeast loves sugar, so that can increase the risk of thrush as well. So it's just the whole picture. And obviously self-treatment over the counter is fantastic. There's the pharmacy first scheme, etc. Now that we've got in the UK, the pharmacies are amazing. But sometimes if you're still having those problems, still got those niggles, then it's just about kind of digging deeper. So finally, Ella, where can our listeners learn more about UVISA, and where can they learn more about you and your journey?
Embarrassingly, we're not yet on Instagram or TikTok, but we do have LinkedIn, and we have a very good website which we are updating with learning articles actually about, the vagina and the microbiome, these conditions. So our website is a very good source. So that's uvisahealth.com. And then, yeah, you can find us on LinkedIn, hopefully soon also on Instagram.
Are we watching the space for Instagram? Is that what you're hinting at?
Yeah, I think Instagram's high up on our radar because our target audience are predominantly Instagram over other platforms at the moment.
Yeah, for
Claudia,
sure.
maybe you could ship the pineapple over to Denmark with all of its flashing lights for Ella's first.
Got some ideas, Ella. I've got some ideas I can share with you for free.
Nice, nice. I'm very keen.
Oh, well, thank you so much for coming on, Ella. Really, really enjoyed our
Thank
chat
you for having
today.
me.
Thank
Me
you.
too. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
See you.
See you.
Thanks for being here. We love having you with us on this journey through women's health and innovation.
Follow us on Instagram at the Pink Pineapple Podcast for clips, conversations, and the latest in women's health and femtech.
We'll see you next week. Same pineapple, new topic. Everything we talk about on the Pink Pineapple Podcast is here to inform and inspire, but it's not a substitute for professional medical advice. If you're worried about your health, please reach out to your GP or healthcare provider.